It started with something so small, a child's toy truck left at the edge of a quiet cul-de-sac. But in this neighborhood, small things always turned into wars. Within minutes, a woman from the HOA stormed across the street, snatched the toy from two little kids, and called it a violation. What she didn't realize was that someone was recording, and what happened next would shake the entire community, exposing secrets that went far beyond a plastic truck. Because sometimes the biggest battles aren't fought in court, they're fought on your own front lawn. The neighborhood of Willow Creek looked perfect, the kind of place where lawns were trimmed in perfect lines. Mailboxes gleamed with fresh paint, and kids rode their bikes in circles until the streetlights flicked on. It was quiet, orderly, and for most people, that was exactly how they liked it. But beneath the surface, Willow Creek had its own unspoken rule: you don't stand out. The Thompsons had just moved in 3 months earlier, a young family with 2 kids, ages 5 and 7, full of energy and laughter. They were the kind of children who built tiny racetracks in the driveway, raced their toy trucks across the sidewalk, and turned every weekend into an outdoor adventure. Their parents, Marcus and Danielle, were proud homeowners, working long hours to give their kids the simple joys they'd both grown up without. At first, life in Willow Creek seemed peaceful. Neighbors waved politely, dogs barked from behind fences, and the HOA newsletter arrived like clockwork, full of smiling photos, landscaping reminders, and thinly veiled warnings about community standards. Danielle laughed it off, thinking it was just suburban formality. But Marcus noticed something else: the way a few neighbors stared just a little too long, or how their smiles disappeared the moment the garage door closed. Then came the first letter, a notice about unauthorized toys left in the shared areas. The toy in question: their son's small red truck left on the curb after an afternoon of play. Danielle thought it was a mistake, a harmless misunderstanding. But when she went to the HOA office to clear it up, she was met with the cold, clipped tone of a woman who seemed more interested in control than conversation. Her name was Karen Mitchell, the HOA president, self-appointed guardian of order in Willow Creek. She lived 2 houses down, her lawn pristine, her security cameras angled just so. She claimed the rules were there to protect property values, but to Marcus it felt like something else, a power game played under the disguise of community pride. For a while, the Thompsons tried to keep the peace. They stored the toys neatly, avoided confrontation, and smiled when Karen passed by on her morning walks. But it didn't matter. Once Karen decided someone didn't fit, there was no going back. And soon, it wouldn't just be about a toy truck. It would become a battle that tested their patience, their dignity, and their belief that good people could win against the system. Because in Willow Creek, rules weren't made to protect. They were made to remind you who really runs the neighborhood. The first notice had felt like a nuisance, an irritating but minor thing. The Thompsons had shrugged it off, paid the small administrative fee, and promised themselves they'd be more careful next time. But the thing about Willow Creek's HOA was that it never stopped at one warning. Once your name was on their radar, it stayed there, highlighted, underlined, whispered about at meetings you weren't invited to. A week later, another letter arrived. This time, the complaint wasn't about toys, it was about the condition of their grass. The HOA claimed their lawn didn't meet the community's color standards. Color standards for grass. Marcus laughed when he first read it, thinking it had to be a joke. But it wasn't. The notice came with a fine, $150, due within 10 days. The letter ended with a threat: failure to comply may result in legal action or a lien against your property. That's when Danielle stopped laughing. Marcus spent his next Saturday in the blistering sun, watering, mowing, and reseeding the lawn until it looked like a golf course. The following week, another notice came: unapproved lawn ornament. The ornament in question was a small garden gnome their daughter had placed by the walkway. Karen's signature was at the bottom, bold and smug. It became clear this wasn't about the rules. It was personal. Neighbors started noticing, too. Some quietly sympathized but said nothing, afraid to become the next target. Others, the ones who always seemed to side with Karen, began watching the Thompsons' house like hawks. Cars slowed down when passing. The HOA patrol took photos at random hours. Danielle once looked out the window to see Karen herself standing across the street, phone in hand, snapping pictures of their driveway. And then came the moment that changed everything. It was a warm afternoon, one of those golden evenings when the sun hits the pavement just right. The kids were outside playing with their toy trucks, laughing, racing them down the slight slope of the sidewalk. Danielle was on the porch, scrolling through her phone, when she saw Karen walking toward them. At first, she thought Karen was just passing by. But Karen's pace quickened, her expression sharp with disapproval. She stopped in front of the kids, hands on her hips. Without a word, she bent down, snatched one of the toy trucks off the ground, and held it up like it was evidence. Danielle froze. Karen turned to her with that practiced HOA smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes, and said, "This is a violation. Toys can't be left in shared spaces." Then she dropped the truck into her tote bag and walked away. The kids stood there stunned, watching their toy disappear. Danielle's heart pounded with anger, disbelief, and humiliation. She wanted to shout, to demand the toy back, but her voice caught in her throat. The neighbors had come out now, quiet spectators pretending to water their plants. Marcus got home minutes later. When Danielle told him what happened, he didn't say a word. He simply walked across the street to Karen's house, knocked on the door, and waited. She didn't answer. Instead, he found another notice taped to their front door that evening, a formal warning for verbal harassment of HOA officials. That's when Marcus decided enough was enough. He began documenting everything, every letter, every photo, every absurd fine. He installed a camera by the front porch, not for safety, but for evidence. Within days, the footage started piling up. Karen walking past their home, taking photos. The HOA patrol vehicles stopping by for routine checks. Even one of the board members measuring the height of their mailbox post with a ruler. Each new clip told the same story, harassment disguised as regulation. Danielle wanted to move. The stress was eating her alive. The kids were afraid to play outside, asking if the lady would take their toys again. But Marcus refused to be pushed out. He'd worked his entire life for this home. He wasn't going to let some self-appointed neighborhood tyrant drive them away. Then, just when they thought things couldn't get worse, the HOA accused them of violating noise ordinances. According to the complaint, their kids were disrupting the peace by playing outside after 6 p.m. Marcus demanded proof, but none was given, only another fine. He attended the next HOA meeting, determined to confront them publicly. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, the same one that hosted wine nights and bake sales. But that night, the atmosphere was different, cold, rehearsed, hostile. Karen sat at the head of the table like a queen on her throne, flanked by board members who nodded at every word she spoke. When Marcus raised his concerns, Karen smiled politely and said, "All homeowners are expected to respect the rules they agreed to." She slid a folder toward him, a compilation of every alleged infraction, complete with timestamps and photos. It looked official, but Marcus knew most of it was fabricated or exaggerated. Still, when he tried to argue, she cut him off, saying, "If you're unhappy here, perhaps Willow Creek isn't the right fit for your family." The words stung like poison. It wasn't just an insult, it was a threat. That night, Marcus posted a clip from his security camera to social media. The one showing Karen taking the toy truck. He didn't expect it to explode the way it did. Within hours, the post had thousands of views, and comments poured in. Some from neighbors who were too afraid to speak up until now. Others from people across the country who dealt with the same kind of petty, power-hungry HOA leaders. Karen's name started trending locally. The next morning, the HOA inbox flooded with complaints, not from residents, but from outsiders demanding accountability. Karen tried to deny it, claiming the video was taken out of context, but it was too late. The footage was clear, and the story had gone viral. But instead of backing down, Karen doubled down. The HOA board issued a temporary suspension of community privileges against the Thompsons, meaning they couldn't use the pool, the clubhouse, or even attend meetings. It was retaliation, plain and simple. And behind the scenes, Karen started spreading rumors that Marcus had a temper, that Danielle was uncooperative, that the family brought drama into the neighborhood. Marcus was furious, but he played it smart. He reached out to an attorney specializing in HOA law. Together, they reviewed the HOA's bylaws and found something shocking: multiple procedural violations in how fines and warnings were issued. The HOA had overstepped its authority on nearly every count. But Marcus didn't strike back immediately. He waited. Days later, another incident gave him exactly what he needed. Karen had been caught on camera again, this time trespassing on their property, pulling up one of their new garden plants and tossing it into a trash bag. The footage was undeniable. Marcus sent it directly to the HOA board, copying every homeowner in the neighborhood. Within hours, chaos erupted. Board members scrambled to distance themselves from Karen, claiming they had no knowledge of her actions. And yet, even as pressure mounted, Karen refused to apologize. She called it enforcing standards, insisting she'd done nothing wrong. But the cracks in her control were starting to show. At the next HOA meeting, several residents confronted her publicly. One after another, they shared their own stories: late fees for imaginary violations, threats over mailbox colors, citations for parked cars that didn't even belong to them. It was as if Marcus's courage had opened a floodgate. Karen tried to restore order, pounding the gavel, but the room had turned against her. For the first time, she wasn't the one in control. Still, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because behind her smile, Karen was planning her next move, one that would drag the Thompsons into the fight of their lives. One that would make them question whether justice in Willow Creek was ever truly possible. And as Marcus left that meeting, with his neighbors finally seeing the truth, he couldn't shake one question: if Karen could do all this and still hold power, what else was she capable of? The week after the stormy HOA meeting felt strangely quiet, too quiet. For the first time since they'd moved in, the Thompsons' mailbox was empty. No fines, no warnings, no reminders, just silence. Marcus didn't trust it. He knew people like Karen didn't retreat. They regrouped. And sure enough, he was right. It started with an envelope, thicker than usual, stamped urgent in red. Inside was a formal notice from the HOA attorney. Notice of violation and intent to lien. They claimed the Thompsons owed over $4,000 in unpaid fines, a total that had somehow ballooned overnight. Grass violations, decorative violations, disruptive conduct, failure to comply with HOA leadership. It was a list that looked more like a character assassination than a property complaint. If they didn't pay within 15 days, the HOA could take legal action, even move toward foreclosure. Danielle sat at the kitchen table, letter trembling in her hands. "They're trying to take our house," she whispered. Marcus clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles went white. "Not this time," he said. "They picked the wrong family." He gathered every letter, every recording, every photo. The folders filled half the dining table, months of paper trails and digital evidence. Each file was a piece of Karen's empire of control, He contacted his attorney, who'd been quietly building a case of his own. What they uncovered made Marcus's blood run cold. Karen had been violating state HOA laws for years, issuing fines without board votes, tampering with financial reports, even using HOA funds for personal expenses. She'd effectively turned Willow Creek into her own private kingdom. And now, for the first time, someone had enough proof to bring it all down. The lawyer filed a formal complaint with the State Housing Authority and requested an emergency injunction to stop the lien. But Marcus wasn't done. He knew that for people like Karen, legal action alone wasn't enough. She thrived on image, the spotless reputation, the illusion of control. So he decided to hit her where it hurt most. Publicly, the next HOA meeting was announced as mandatory attendance. Karen framed it as an important financial discussion, but everyone knew it was damage control. The clubhouse filled fast, neighbors whispering, cameras discreetly recording. Karen arrived, dressed for victory navy blazer, manicured smile, and a stack of binders she pretended not to tremble as she carried. She started the meeting with her usual charm, talking about community integrity and maintaining standards. But when Marcus's name came up, her tone sharpened. She accused him of defamation, of harassing HOA officials, and of spreading misinformation. Her words poured out like poison, calm, rehearsed, manipulative. She presented the lien notice as necessary enforcement. Marcus stood in the back, letting her talk, letting her build her own noose. When she finally finished, he walked to the front, silent, carrying a single manila folder. Every eye in the room followed him. "Before you continue," he said evenly, "I think the board and this community deserves to see the whole story." He opened the folder and handed copies of documents to the front row, screenshots of emails, invoices, and altered receipts. Gasps rippled through the crowd as people read the highlighted lines. HOA payments rerouted to personal accounts. Expenses labeled as administrative costs that were actually salon visits, restaurant tabs, and boutique purchases. Karen froze. "This is slander," she snapped, but her voice cracked. Marcus didn't flinch. He connected his phone to the projector and played the video, the one showing Karen trespassing on their property, yanking flowers from the garden while muttering under her breath. The room went dead silent. Then came the murmurs, disbelief, outrage, betrayal. A board member, the treasurer, stood up, face pale. "Karen," he said, voice shaking, "is this true? Did you use HOA funds for personal expenses?" Karen's mask began to slip. "Those were authorized reimbursements. I've done more for this community than anyone else." She snapped. But no one was nodding this time. The treasurer turned to Marcus. "We'll need to review this immediately," he said, voice trembling. Marcus didn't stop there. He pulled out one last paper, the legal injunction filed that morning. "This," he said, holding it high, "is a state order freezing all HOA financial activity pending investigation. Effective immediately." Gasps turned into whispers, whispers into outrage. People began filming. Karen's composure shattered completely. "You don't understand." She screamed, slamming her binder shut. "This neighborhood needs order. Without me, it'll fall apart." But the room wasn't hers anymore. The crowd turned the very people she'd ruled with fear and rules and fines. One woman in the back shouted, "You fined my husband for leaving our trash bin out 10 minutes late." Another added, "You sent letters about my Christmas lights." The tension broke into chaos. Karen backed toward the door, her face twisted between rage and disbelief. For the first time, she was the one being watched, judged, and recorded. Marcus stood there, heart pounding, watching her flee into the parking lot as the board announced an emergency vote to remove her from power. It was over, or so he thought. Woe days later, at dawn, Marcus was woken by pounding on the door. He opened it to find a police cruiser parked outside. Karen had filed a harassment complaint claiming Marcus had threatened her safety and stalked her property. It was a desperate, last-ditch attempt to flip the narrative. But she didn't know that Marcus had already handed over all his footage and messages to the authorities. The officer reviewed the evidence right there on the porch, and by the end of the week, it was Karen facing legal charges. Not Marcus. Fraud, harassment, misuse of funds. When the HOA board called an emergency community meeting to announce her removal. The turnout was the largest in Willow Creek history. The new acting president, a soft-spoken retiree named Mr. Hanley, read the decision aloud, effective immediately. Karen Mitchell is permanently removed from her position as HOA president and barred from holding any office in this association. Applause erupted. Relief spread like a wave. Some neighbors cried. Others just looked stunned, as if realizing for the first time how much fear they'd been living under. Danielle stood at the back, holding Marcus's hand. She whispered, "It's really over." He didn't answer at first. He was still staring at the empty chair where Karen used to sit, the throne she'd built out of control, now toppled in front of everyone. But even as he exhaled, something about it felt unfinished. Because when someone like Karen falls, they don't go quietly. That night, as the Thompsons sat on their porch for the first time in peace, Marcus noticed something glinting in the bushes near their fence, a small black object. He walked over and picked it up. It was a security camera, not theirs. Someone had placed it facing their yard. He looked up, scanning the dark street, but saw no one. Just the hum of distant street lights and the faint sound of sprinklers. The next morning, Karen's house sat empty for sale sign out front, windows shuttered. But that camera in his hand told him everything. She hadn't stopped watching until the very end. And as Marcus placed it on the table beside the pile of old notices, he realized something chilling. Willow Creek wasn't just about one woman's control. It was about what happens when a community lets fear become policy, when rules replace compassion, and when silence becomes compliance. Karen was gone, yes, but the system she built, that would take a lot longer to dismantle. The neighborhood was free again, at least on paper. But the question that lingered was one that no HOA rulebook could answer. When people get a taste of power, do they ever really give it up? The days after Karen's downfall felt almost unreal. The neighborhood that once pulsed with silent judgment now hummed with cautious relief. Lawns still shimmered in perfect stripes. Driveways still gleamed, but something invisible had changed. For the first time in years, people were talking to each other again. Not in clipped HOA-approved pleasantries, but in genuine conversation. The Thompsons could finally breathe. The first morning of peace, Danielle made pancakes, the kind she hadn't cooked since their move to Willow Creek. The kids played outside without fear, laughter spilling down the cul-de-sac like it used to. Their red toy truck, the one that started it all, rolled across the pavement freely once again. It was more than just a toy now. It was a symbol of what they'd endured and what they refused to lose. But while the surface of the neighborhood seemed calm, the aftermath beneath was far from over. The state's investigation into the HOA dragged on for months, uncovering deeper layers of corruption. Karen had siphoned thousands in maintenance fees into personal accounts. She'd fined homeowners illegally, manipulated elections, and intimidated dissenting board members. One by one, the board members resigned. Some out of guilt, others out of fear. Eventually, the HOA was dissolved temporarily, replaced by a court-appointed administrator tasked with restructuring it from the ground up. For Marcus and Danielle, justice wasn't instant, but it was real. Their attorney kept them updated as the case wound through the system. When the final report came in, Karen was found guilty of multiple counts of financial fraud and harassment. She avoided jail time through a plea deal, but was ordered to repay. tens of thousands, and banned from serving on any HOA or community board ever again. Her once pristine reputation, the very thing she'd built her power on, was shattered. Word spread quickly, even beyond Willow Creek. Local news picked up the story. HOA president removed after viral. Video exposes abuse of power. The footage of her taking that little toy truck became the centerpiece of every article, a perfect metaphor for the pettiness that had consumed the neighborhood. For weeks, Marcus's inbox filled with messages from strangers, homeowners from across the country who'd faced the same kind of tyranny. Some thanked him for standing up. Others shared their own battles with unfair rules, forged fines, and unchecked authority. What had started as one family's nightmare had become something bigger. A wake-up call about how easily community rules could turn into community control. And yet, despite the vindication, Marcus couldn't shake the bittersweet feeling that lingered. The victory came at a cost. The sleepless nights, the strain on their marriage, the fear their kids had carried, none of that disappeared overnight. It took time. For a while, Marcus avoided community meetings altogether. But one evening, a soft knock came at their door. It was Mr. Hanley, the new acting president, carrying a clipboard and a shy smile. "Marcus," he said, "I wanted to ask if you'd consider joining the new board. We're rebuilding, and we could use someone who knows what fairness looks like." At first, Marcus hesitated. He'd had enough of rules and politics to last a lifetime. But when he looked past Mr. Hanley at the neighborhood, the kids playing together again, the neighbors sharing coffee over fences, he realized something. Real change only lasts if good people stay involved. So, he said yes. The first new HOA meeting looked nothing like the old ones. No intimidation, no power games, just residents sitting in a circle, speaking freely about how to make Willow Creek feel like home again. Someone suggested adding a playground near the cul-de-sac for the kids. Someone else offered to paint over the violation wall in the clubhouse, where Karen used to post infractions like trophies. Danielle volunteered to lead a community kindness initiative, a small newsletter, highlighting acts of neighborly goodwill instead of rule-breaking. For the first time, it felt like a neighborhood, not a dictatorship. But even as life settled, reminders of the past still surfaced. One afternoon, as Marcus trimmed the hedges, he noticed the faint outline of the old surveillance camera screw holes still in the fence post. It made him pause, not with fear, but with reflection. He thought about how easy it had been for one person to manipulate a system designed for order and twist it into oppression, and how close they'd come to losing everything, not just their home, but their sense of belonging, their trust in others, even their peace of mind. That night, after dinner, Marcus sat on the porch with Danielle, the golden hour light washing over the neighborhood. The kids were playing with that same little red truck again. He smiled faintly and said, "You know, that toy caused more trouble than anything I've ever owned." Danielle laughed softly. "Maybe. But it also showed everyone who she really was." He nodded. "Yeah. Sometimes the smallest things expose the biggest truths." As the sun dipped below the rooftops, a light breeze carried the smell of fresh-cut grass, the same grass Karen once fined them for. It felt symbolic, like nature reclaiming its space from control. Months passed. The Thompsons grew closer to their neighbors, even the ones who'd once kept their distance. People began helping each other, fixing mailboxes, repainting fences, sharing tools. Little by little, the fear that had ruled Willow Creek faded into memory. And yet, every so often, Marcus would get a message from someone new, a homeowner halfway across the country facing their own version of Karen. They'd ask for advice, for courage, for proof that standing up was worth it. His answer was always the same: keep your records, know your rights, and never let fear silence you. Because he'd learned something powerful through the ordeal. HOA bullies and controlling neighbors don't thrive because they're strong. They thrive because people stay quiet. Once one person dares to challenge them, their power begins to crumble. A year later, Willow Creek looked almost unrecognizable. The community park was under renovation. The new HOA charter was publicly available for everyone to read, and the board meetings were streamed online for transparency. For the first time in its history, residents voted unanimously to include a new clause. No rule or action may infringe upon the reasonable enjoyment of one's home. That line, short, simple, and hard-earned, became the neighborhood's new foundation. The Thompsons' lives slowly returned to normal. Marcus found peace in gardening again, something he'd stopped doing when every plant felt like a potential violation. Danielle started a small blog sharing stories of homeowner resilience, and it quickly gained a following. She titled it Front Lawn Freedom. The red toy truck still sat on a shelf in the garage, a little scratched but still intact. Every now and then, Marcus would catch himself glancing at it, remembering how one woman's cruelty had tried to define their story and how they had rewritten it instead. Karen's house eventually sold. A young couple moved in, quiet, friendly, and completely unaware of the history behind their new home. Sometimes Marcus wondered if Karen ever watched from afar, scrolling through headlines or reading the comments under the viral video that exposed her. Maybe she did. Maybe she didn't, but in the end, it didn't matter. Because the real victory wasn't her downfall. It was the neighborhood's rebirth. In a world where control often hides behind the language of order and rules, the Thompsons had reminded everyone that communities are supposed to protect, not police. And as the final lines of Danielle's next blog post read, we learned that peace doesn't come from silence. It comes from standing up, not with anger, but with truth. The rules that keep us safe should never be the ones that strip us of our humanity. And if you ever find yourself in a battle you didn't ask for, remember, even a toy truck can start a revolution. The post went viral again, not because of outrage, but because it gave people hope. Hope that no matter how deep the corruption runs, truth still finds a way to surface. Hope that communities can rebuild after fear. And hope that sometimes justice isn't about punishment, it's about reclaiming your peace. That night, as porch lights flickered on across Willow Creek, Marcus leaned back in his chair and listened to the distant laughter of his kids. The same laughter that once felt dangerous now felt sacred. For the first time since moving there, he didn't look over his shoulder. He didn't worry about notices, about eyes watching from behind curtains. He just smiled, letting the quiet hum of the neighborhood settle around him, not as a cage, but as a home. And with that, the story of Willow Creek closed, not on vengeance, but on victory, the kind that lives not in headlines or court rulings, but in the peace of a family that refused to be broken. Because, in the end, it wasn't about the truck. It was about the truth.